ADX Supermax, where the world's most dangerous criminals rot, buried alive in concrete. The steel door slams shut with a sound so cold it makes your bones shake. Inside, a man sits alone in a tiny cell. No window to the outside world, only thick concrete walls and a slot where food is pushed through like he's an animal. This is ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in Colorado, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. It is the place where the world's most dangerous criminals are locked away to rot. Terrorists, cartel bosses, serial killers. They all end up here, trapped in silence for 23 hours a day, cut off from the world, with no chance of escape. But tonight, something terrifying is happening behind these walls. An inmate, one of the most feared men inside, has snapped. He begins smashing his head against the wall, screaming words that echo down the hallway. "This place is killing me, and I'm taking someone with me." The guards rush in, but what they find next will send shockwaves through the entire prison. And the question is, what really happens when even the world's toughest criminals lose their minds inside ADX? The prison built for monsters. ADX Florence was designed for one purpose: to break the spirit of men who could not be controlled anywhere else. Every cell is built like a tomb, 8 feet by 12 feet of solid concrete. Prisoners eat, sleep, and use the toilet all in the same space, with only a narrow slit in the wall that shows nothing but the sky. For the first few weeks, many prisoners try to fight the system. They bang on doors, they yell at guards, they even try to flood their cells with toilet water. But ADX always wins. Silence, isolation, routine. Day after day, their voices fade. Their minds begin to slip. And that's when the real danger starts. Because when men like Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber, or El Chapo Guzman, the cartel kingpin, are left alone with nothing but their thoughts, something dark begins to grow inside them. One inmate sharpened a piece of metal from his food tray, hiding it in his mattress. Another carved messages into the wall with his fingernails until his hands bled. The guards thought they had everything under control. But then, one night, a loud scream ripped through the tier. An inmate had slashed his arm wide open, painting the walls with blood. The officers charged toward the cell. But what they discovered waiting for them inside was far worse than anyone expected. Blood on the walls. The officer stood frozen for a split second. Blood dripped from the man's arm, soaking into the concrete floor. His eyes were wide, but empty, like he was no longer human. They shouted, "Get down! Get down!" But instead of obeying, he dragged his blood across the wall, spelling words no one could forget. This place is hell. The guards had no choice. They stormed in with shields, wrestling him to the ground. His screams filled the corridor, echoing through the blocks so every prisoner could hear. After the chaos, they carried him away, shackled and bleeding, and for a moment, the prison went silent again. But silence inside ADX is never peace. It's the sound of pressure building. The next morning, the routine carried on as usual. Food trays slid through the slots. Inmates ate alone. Doors never opened. From the outside, it looked like the prison was in control again. But deep inside the cell blocks, the other inmates had been watching, and some of them were planning. Because in ADX Florence, nothing spreads faster than madness. That night, when a guard walked past the cells, he noticed something strange. The inmate wasn't lying on his bed. He was standing, silent, staring at the guard with something shiny in his hand. It wasn't food. It wasn't plastic. It was metal, a sharpened shank. And just as the officer leaned closer to look, the inmate lunged straight at the door, stabbing to the narrow food slot, aiming right for his throat. The slot attack. The officer jerked back just in time. The blade scraped his uniform, missing his throat by inches. Shouts erupted as the alarm blared through the block. Red lights flashed across the concrete walls. Within seconds, a tactical team rushed in, shields raised. They pinned the inmate to the ground, prying the shank from his grip. But the damage was done. The guards realized something chilling. If he'd been even one step closer, the officer would be dead. When the attack ended, they locked down the entire wing. Every prisoner was sealed inside their cell. The guards tightened security, doubling patrols, checking every tray, every mattress, every corner of concrete. For a few days, things seemed quiet again. No screams, no blood, just silence and steel. But quiet in ADX never lasts, because silence doesn't mean safety. It means someone somewhere is waiting. 1 week later, it started again. This time, not with a scream, not with blood, but with fire. A prisoner had somehow set his mattress ablaze. Flames roared inside the tiny cell, smoke pouring out through the cracks. He pounded on the steel door, coughing, shouting, laughing like a man already lost. The fire alarms howled. Guards scrambled with extinguishers, choking on black smoke as they fought to put it out. And then, just as the smoke cleared, a second cell burst into flames. The flames of madness. The smoke filled the corridor so thick that guards could barely see. They dragged hoses and extinguishers into place, blasting water through the food slots. The fire hissed and died, leaving the walls blackened and the air heavy with the smell of burned fabric. Coughing inmates slammed their fists against their doors, screaming at the chaos. Others laughed, finding entertainment in the destruction. To them, this was the only way to fight back against a place designed to break their souls. The guards restored order after hours of battling smoke. They removed the scorched mattresses, locked the cell doors tighter, and doubled the number of officers in the unit. For a while, the prison seemed to calm again. The routines returned. Steel trays sliding through food slots, guards pacing the tiers, inmates staring at walls in silence. But the fire had lit something else, a spark of rebellion, and it was spreading. Days later, while guards delivered breakfast, one noticed a cell unusually quiet. Inside, the inmate was motionless on his bed. His tray was untouched. His chest didn't rise. The officer called for backup. They rushed in and checked for a pulse. Nothing. The man was gone, dead in his cell. But when they rolled him over, they found something carved deep into his arm. Words scratched in blood and skin that sent a chill through every guard who saw them. I won't rot alone. Rotting alone. The lifeless body was carried out on a stretcher. Inmates banged on their doors, whistling, mocking the guards. But the carved message stayed burned into everyone's mind. I won't rot alone. The prison warden ordered a full investigation. Psychologists were brought in. Guards were reminded of the rules. Never let your guard down. Never show weakness. For a few days, the corridors were silent again, too silent. Even the loudest inmates whispered, as if the prison itself had swallowed their voices. Some prisoners retreated deeper into their madness. One spent hours pacing in circles, talking to people who weren't there. Another scratched tally marks into the wall, until the concrete tore his fingernails raw. The guards thought the storm had passed. They believed the worst was over. But inside ADX, peace is an illusion. It's just the pause before the next explosion. One evening, during mail delivery, a guard slid an envelope through a slot. The inmate picked it up, looked at it, then tore it open. But instead of reading it, he pulled out a razor blade hidden inside the paper. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward and slashed at the guard's arm through the slot. Blood spraying across the steel door. The hallway erupted in chaos once again. Blades in the mail. The officer clutched his arm, blood dripping onto the cold concrete floor. Alarms blared, red lights flashing, boots pounding down the corridor as the emergency team rushed in. They restrained the inmate, his hands still slick with the guard's blood, and dragged him to solitary confinement. An even deeper hole inside the Supermax. The prison locked down. Every letter was checked. Every package ripped apart. Even the guards looked over their shoulders, wondering how a weapon had slipped through a place designed to be escape-proof. Days turned into weeks. The chaos of the attack faded. Prisoners sank back into their routines. Silence, steel trays, and the endless echo of nothing. But in ADX, calm never means safe. Because beneath that silence, the tension was boiling again. One night, a guard making his rounds stopped dead in his tracks. From inside a cell came a sound he hadn't heard before. Not shouting, not banging, not laughter. It was singing. Low, eerie singing like a chant. He leaned closer to listen, and his stomach dropped. Several voices, different cells, were chanting the same words in unison. It wasn't English. It was something darker, something that chilled him to the bone. And then, suddenly, metal clanged hard against the doors. Dozens of inmates began smashing their trays against the steel, the noise thundering through the block like a riot about to explode. The guard fumbled for his radio, and before backup arrived, a tray flew through the food slot, smashing into his face and knocking him to the ground. The chant of the damned. The guard hit the ground, blood streaming down his face. The block roared with noise, trays slamming, voices chanting in the dark. It sounded less like a prison and more like a battlefield. Within minutes, the response team stormed in, shields up, batons raised. They shouted commands, pounding on the doors, trying to drown out the chaos. Slowly, the noise died down. The inmates fell silent, retreating back into their cells like predators waiting for the next chance to strike. The injured officer was carried out, his face swollen and bloodied. The warden doubled security once again. More cameras, more checks, stricter rules. For a while, the block fell back into routine. But inside ADX, the calm is never real. It's a mask, and masks always crack. Days later, during evening rounds, one guard noticed something strange. An inmate's light was out, completely dark. He tapped on the door. No answer. He slid the food slot open and shined a flashlight inside. The sight froze him. The prisoner was sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring straight ahead with eyes wide open. His walls were covered in writing, scratched into the concrete, smeared in what looked like blood. But it wasn't just random words. It was a list of names. And at the very bottom, the guard saw his own name carved into the wall. The list of death. The guard staggered back from the door, his heart pounding in his chest. His name, scratched into the wall of a prisoner's cell, was staring right back at him. He radioed for backup immediately. Within minutes, officers flooded the block, dragging the inmate out in chains. They searched the cell, photographing every word carved into the concrete. The list was long. Some names were prisoners. Others were guards. And at least one belonged to someone on the outside. The inmate said nothing, refusing to explain. He just smiled, a twisted grin that made even the toughest officer uneasy. The prison tightened down once again. Psychologists called it delusional fixation. The guards called it something else, a death threat written in blood. For a few days, everyone moved with caution. Guards avoided walking alone. Prisoners stared silently from behind their doors. It felt like the prison was holding its breath. But ADX never stays quiet for long. Late one night, another officer doing his rounds stopped at a cell. The inmate inside was lying on his bed, motionless. The officer tapped the door. No response. He slid the slot open to check. Suddenly, the prisoner lunged at the slot with something in his mouth. It was a broken piece of glass, jammed between his teeth like fangs. He spat it out, aiming straight for the guard's face. The shard slashed across the officer's cheek, leaving a line of blood as he stumbled back in shock. And behind the steel door, the prisoner laughed. Glass and blood. The guard pressed his hand to his cheek, feeling the warm blood drip between his fingers. The laughter echoing from behind the steel door was worse than the pain. It was a sound of victory. The prisoner knew he had struck fear into the heart of the system. The response team dragged the inmate out, shackled and muzzled, tossing him into disciplinary isolation. The hall was scrubbed clean, the blood wiped away, the glass swept from the floor. But the scars on the guard's face and on the prison's reputation remained. The warden called for another emergency meeting. ADX was supposed to be unbreakable, a fortress, but cracks were showing. If prisoners could carve lists, start fires, smuggle blades, and spit glass like weapons, what would they do next? For a moment, it looked like things were under control again. The days passed in silence. The food slots opened and closed. The lights switched on and off. Routine, routine, routine. But in ADX, routine is only the cover for the storm. One afternoon, a guard slid a tray into a cell. As he turned to walk away, he heard something he hadn't expected. Click. He froze. That sound didn't belong in a cell. It was the sound of metal sharpened, ready. The prisoner shoved something through the slot. At first, the guard thought it was another shank, but when he looked closer, his stomach dropped. It wasn't a weapon. It was a handcuff key. The key that shouldn't exist. The guard's hands trembled as he held the tiny object up to the light. A handcuff key, real metal, small enough to hide in a sock, powerful enough to break the very rules that kept ADX together. The alarms rang again. Officers swarmed the tier, dragging the inmate out and flipping his cell upside down. Every inch was searched. Mattresses cut open. Toilet ripped apart. Walls scanned for hidden holes. But no one could explain how the key got there. Was it smuggled in? Was it crafted inside? Or worse, did someone on the outside help him? The warden ordered an immediate crackdown. Mail was stopped. Visits suspended. Even staff members were questioned. For days, the prison ran on paranoia. Every guard looked at the prisoners differently. Every prisoner looked back with a silent grin, as if they knew something the guards didn't. The investigation dragged on, but answers never came. The key had disappeared into evidence, but the fear stayed alive. And just when officials thought the crisis was contained, another officer made a chilling discovery. During evening rounds, he noticed something scratched into the steel door of a different cell. At first it looked like random marks, but when he leaned closer, his heart froze. It was the shape of a key, drawn over and over again, hundreds of times. And inside the cell, the prisoner whispered through the slot, "You think you took the only one?" Keys in the shadows. The guard stumbled back from the door, his pulse hammering in his ears. The prisoner's whisper echoed like poison. "You think you took the only one?" Word spread fast. Within hours, every officer knew about the scratched keys, about the chilling threat that maybe, just maybe, someone else inside ADX had another way out of their chains. The warden's voice thundered to the prison. "This facility will remain locked down until every inch is secure." Cells were stripped bare. Every tray was searched. Lights stayed on all night. The prisoners were left in silence, so thick it felt like the walls themselves were pressing in. For days, the tension hung heavy. No shouting, no banging, just the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the sound of guards' boots echoing on the concrete floors. But silence is never safety in ADX. It's only the deep breath before the scream. One evening, during a routine round, a guard slid a dinner tray through a slot. The prisoner didn't move, didn't touch the food. The officer leaned closer. And then, suddenly, the tray shot back out, harder than any man should have been able to push it. It slammed into the guard's chest, knocking him backward. Inside the cell, the inmate pressed his face against the slot, and clenched between his teeth was something small, something metal, something shaped exactly like a key. The key in his teeth. The guard froze, staring into the slot. The prisoner's teeth clamped down on the small, glinting shape. A key. The impossible, right there in his mouth. "Drop it! Drop it!" the officer shouted. But the inmate only smiled, tilted his head like a predator enjoying the game. The tactical team stormed in. They pinned him to the floor, pried his jaw open, and ripped the object out. It was metal. It was jagged, and it looked exactly like a handcuff key. The warden had no choice. He ordered a full-scale emergency. Every inmate was searched. Every vent, every drain, every crack in the concrete was inspected. Mail delivery stopped. Visits suspended indefinitely. For days, the prison ran in total silence. The inmates sat in darkness. Food pushed through their slots with no words exchanged. Guards worked in pairs, never walking alone. The system tightened. The fortress seemed sealed again. But in ADX, control is only an illusion. A week later, as the guards did morning rounds, they heard a sound they hadn't heard in months. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't banging. It was laughter, low, echoing, coming from multiple cells at once. As the officers approached, the laughter grew louder, and then all at once, clink, 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 from inside several cells. Prisoners began tapping metal against the bars. Not one, not two, but dozens of them. The guards froze, because the sound wasn't random. It was rhythm. It was sync, and it sounded exactly like the jingling of keys. The sound of freedom. The sound of metal echoed through the tier. Clink, 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 in perfect rhythm. Dozens of prisoners tapped against their steel doors. The guards shouted for silence, but the inmates only grew louder. The laughter, the jingling, the pounding. It filled the entire block, bouncing off the concrete like a war drum. It lasted for hours, until finally, the warden ordered a total blackout. Lights out, food delayed, water cut, punishment for every man inside. Slowly, the noise died. The jingling stopped. The laughter faded. The prison returned to silence. For a few days, things seemed under control again. The guards walked the tiers carefully, their eyes scanning every hand, every movement. The prisoners went back to their routines, lying on their bunks, staring at the walls, eating in silence. But ADXs never calm for long, because silence is where the madness grows. One night, as a rookie guard made his rounds, he slid a food tray into a slot. Suddenly, 2 hands shot out of the darkness, grabbing his wrists. The rookie screamed, struggling to pull free, but the grip was iron strong. The inmate yanked him forward, slamming his head against a steel door. As the guard staggered, blood dripping down his forehead, the prisoner whispered through the slot, "We already have the way out. All we need now is the time." All they need is time. The rookie guard was rushed to the infirmary, his face swollen and bleeding. But his words to the warden chilled everyone more than his injuries. He said, "They already have a way out." The warden ordered an immediate investigation. Every officer was briefed. Every prisoner was monitored closer than ever before. ADX was built to be escape-proof. But now, the guards were asking themselves a dangerous question. What if it wasn't? Days passed under heavy lockdown. Meals were reduced. Exercise was cut. The prisoners grew restless, pacing like caged animals. Some shouted threats. Others laughed. But most just sat in silence, staring at the walls, waiting. The calm was nerve-shattering. The guards could feel it. Something was brewing. And then it happened. During evening rounds, an officer slid a tray into a cell. The inmate didn't touch the food. Instead, he walked slowly to the door, staring through the slot with cold, steady eyes. And in his hand, held up for the guard to see, was something that should not exist. A full set of metal cuffs. Unlocked, open, dangling from his fingers. He pressed them against the slot, let them fall to the floor with a loud clank, and whispered, "We don't wait forever." The clank of rebellion. The sound of the open cuffs hitting the concrete echoed down the tier like a gunshot. Every guard froze. Every inmate listened. And in that moment, ADX Florence, the prison meant to be escape-proof, sounded vulnerable. The warden's orders were immediate. Full lockdown. Every cell stripped. Every man checked. Officers tore through the blocks. Mattresses cut apart. Drains inspected. Walls pounded for hollow spaces. Every cuff, every key, every piece of metal in the building was counted. Still, the question remained. If one inmate had cuffs, who else did? For 3 long days, the prison was dead quiet. No trays slammed. No chants. No laughter. Just silence and paranoia. But ADX is a place where silence is never safety. It's only the pause before the storm. On the 4th night, it broke. As a guard bent down to slide a tray into a slot, a hand shot out, not to grab him, but to show him something. A sharpened piece of steel, jagged and glinting in the fluorescent light. The prisoner smiled and pressed it against his own throat, and before the guard could move, he slashed deep across his neck. Blood sprayed the walls. The inmate collapsed to the floor, his body twitching as the guard screamed for medical. But the last words he gurgled before he died chilled everyone who heard them. "We don't rot alone. We don't rot alone." The guards dragged the body from the cell, his blood still staining the floor. The entire tier had witnessed it. The violent slash, the defiance, the chilling final words. "We don't rot alone." For hours, the prison was chaos. Officers sealed the block. Medics rushed in and out. Prison psychologists warned of copycat behavior. The warden demanded absolute control. And for a short time, it seemed to work. The shouting stopped. The trays stayed still. The prisoners sat quietly, staring at their concrete walls. But silence in ADX isn't peace. It's the slow turn of madness winding tighter and tighter. Days later, during morning rounds, another guard noticed something odd. An inmate was lying flat on his bunk, arms crossed over his chest. A message was written on the wall above his bed in what looked like dried blood. Next, the officer called for backup. They rushed in, only to discover the inmate was still alive. But his body was trembling, his lips moving, whispering over and over, "He's not alone, he's not alone." The guard strapped him down, dragging him out as he screamed and laughed all at once. And just when they thought the nightmare couldn't grow worse, a sound erupted through the block. Banging, rhythmic, dozens of fists slamming on steel doors in perfect unison. The prisoners were chanting a single word, over and over, louder each time. Next, next, next. The chant of death. The word thundered through the block. Next, next, next. Every slam of fists on steel doors shook the walls like an earthquake. The guards rushed in, shields raised, barking orders. But the chanting didn't stop. The prisoners were in sync, their voices rising louder, filling the entire unit with a single terrifying message. Someone else was going to die. Finally, the warden cut the power. Darkness swallowed the block. The chanting slowed and then fell silent. Only the sound of guards' heavy breathing remained. For the next week, the prison lived in total lockdown. No recreation, no visits, bare minimum food. The guards worked double shifts, exhaustion etched into their faces. The inmates were stripped of everything: books, mail, even bedding. Concrete walls, concrete floors, nothing else. It looked like control had returned. The halls were quiet. The chanting had stopped. But inside ADX, quiet never lasts. One night, during late rounds, an officer slid open a food slot. Inside, the inmate wasn't waiting for his tray. He was crouched low, his face painted in streaks of red. The guard froze. The inmate rose slowly, pressing his hands against the slot. Both palms were smeared with blood, and carved deep into his own skin were the letters NEXT, marked for death. The guard stumbled back, his radio shaking in his hand. The prisoner's palms pressed against the steel, carved and dripping, spelled a message no one could ignore. NEXT. The tactical team rushed in, dragging the inmate out, his body still trembling with laughter. The walls were scrubbed, the blood washed away. But the mark remained burned into everyone's memory. The warden ordered the strictest lockdown in years. Every corridor patrolled, every tray inspected, every man watched around the clock. For a moment, the madness seemed contained. The blocks fell quiet. The prisoners sat still, staring at their walls, as if the storm had passed. But ADX never stays quiet, because silence here is not peace. It's plotting. A week later, during the early morning count, guards made a horrifying discovery. Inmate after inmate stood at their doors, holding up their hands. Not one, not two, dozens. Each hand was smeared with blood, and carved into their skin was the same word, NEXT. The chanting returned, louder than ever before, fists slamming the steel in unison. And then, all at once, one of the prisoners smashed his head against the door until his forehead split open, blood streaming down his face as he screamed the word over and over. Next, next, next. The cult of next. The tear thundered with fists and voices. Next, next, next. Bloodied palms slammed against steel, echoing like war drums. Guards in riot gear stormed the block, shields raised, batons ready. They sprayed pepper gas through the slots, flooding the cells with choking fumes. One by one, the voices fell silent, replaced by coughing and wheezing. For hours, the chaos seemed to break. The corridors were cleared, the air scrubbed, and the prisoners lay on their bunks in silence. The warden declared order restored. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't control. This was only survival. For days, the prison stayed on edge. Meals were delivered by armed squads. Every sound was met with suspicion. Even the guards whispered among themselves. What happens when the word next becomes action? And then it did. During morning count, officers opened a cell door to remove a silent inmate. But when they stepped inside, their boots slipped on something wet. Blood. The walls were drenched in it. And on the concrete floor lay the inmate, his throat cut wide open, his own sharpened bone still clutched in his hand. But it wasn't just a suicide. On the wall above his body, written in crimson, were 3 words that froze every man in that cell. You are next. You are next. The words dripped across the concrete wall like a curse. You are next. The guards stumbled back from the cell, their faces pale. Even the veterans, men who had worked decades inside the toughest prisons, felt their stomachs twist. The block was locked down instantly. Sirens blared. Orders screamed. Every inmate sealed tighter than before. The warden's voice thundered through the PA system. This is not control. This is war. We will break them before they break us. Psychologists warned of a dangerous chain reaction. The suicide wasn't just one man's madness. It was a message, and messages spread like wildfire inside concrete walls. For a few days, the block grew eerily quiet. No chanting, no banging, just inmates lying still in their bunks, waiting. But waiting for what? The guards moved cautiously. Every tray delivered with shields. Every round made with radios clutched tight. Everyone wondered who would be next. And then the silence shattered. During night rounds, a guard walked past a row of cells when he heard a metallic rattle. He stopped, listened. At first, it sounded like tapping. But then it grew louder, more organized. Clink, 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 from inside the cells. Inmates were holding up objects. Not trays, not spoons. Keys, dozens of keys. Some real, some carved, some crude, but all gleaming in the dim light. And in perfect unison, the prisoners began chanting again, not next, but something worse. Now. From next to now. The chant rattled the walls. Dozens of voices roared in perfect rhythm. Now. 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 The guards tightened their grips on shield and batons, sweat dripping down their faces. What started as whispers had grown into a prison-wide movement. And now, it wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about action. The warden's orders were swift. Full tactical lockdown. No food until silence. No movement until surrender. But silence didn't come. Instead, the noise grew louder. Keys, real and fake, clattered against steel. Bloodied hands slammed on doors. The concrete shook with the force of rage. Hours turned into a standoff. Guards lined the tiers, weapons ready. Inmates shouted threats, curses, promises of violence. For a brief moment, the sound died. The chanting stopped. The halls went still. And then, an explosion of noise ripped through the prison. Dozens of inmates hurled their metal trays out of the slots at once. The clatter deafening. Spoons sharpened into blades flew across the tier, scraping against shields and striking officers. The guards charging with gas. Smoke filling the corridor. But inside the haze, something more terrifying happened. A door rattled. Not a tray slot, not a vent, a full steel door. And through the fog, the impossible became real. One cell door swung open. The door that shouldn't open. The sound froze every man in the corridor. The heavy steel door creaked, grinding against its hinges, then swung wider. It was a sound that was never supposed to exist inside ADX. A prisoner stood in the doorway, his eyes wild, his fists clenched. For the first time, he was outside his cage. "Get down!" the guard screamed, shield slamming into place. Gas hissed through the air, smoke flooding the block. But the prisoner didn't back down. He walked forward, step by step, smiling through the haze like a man already free. The tactical team tackled him hard, pinning him to the ground. Shackles snapped onto his wrists and ankles. The door was slammed shut again, but the damage was already done. The impossible had happened. A cell door had opened. The warden called an emergency lockdown across the entire prison. Every bolt, every lock, every chain was inspected. Theories spread like wildfire. Was it a guard, a smuggled key, or something worse, the system failure? For 2 tense days, the prison remained silent. Food delayed. Exercise canceled. Every man locked in tighter than ever. But silence never lasts in ADX. On the 3rd night, it began again. Not chanting, not banging. Something new. Every light in one block flickered, then went out. Pitch black, and in the darkness, dozens of voices whispered at once. Now, now, now. The blackout. Darkness swallowed the block. The hum of fluorescent lights died. All that remained were whispers, dozens of voices, layered together like a chilling chorus. Now, now, now. Guards scrambled for flashlights, their beams cutting to the black, bouncing across steel doors. But the voices only grew louder, echoing from every corner. And then the pounding began. Dozens of fists slamming doors in perfect rhythm, the sound shaking the concrete. Boom, boom, boom. The tactical team rushed in, gas canisters hissing, shields raised, boots pounding on the floor. But in the black haze, the guards realized something terrifying. The prisoners weren't just chanting. They weren't just pounding. They were counting. One voice shouted over the rest, screaming numbers through the darkness. 3, 2, 1. The pounding stopped. The silence was suffocating. And then, inmates across the block screamed a single word in unison, a word that would echo forever through ADX's haunted halls. Free! The lights snapped back on. The doors were still sealed. The inmates still locked inside. But the message was clear. It wasn't about escaping. It was about breaking the system from the inside, where the world's most dangerous rot. ADX Florence was built to be escape-proof. Concrete walls, steel doors, endless isolation. But what the walls can't contain is the human mind. Inside those cells are the world's most dangerous criminals, men who ruled cartels, plotted terror, and committed crimes too dark to name. But behind those concrete walls, stripped of power, stripped of freedom, stripped of everything but their madness, they find new ways to fight back. Some with fire, some with blood, some with words carved into their own flesh. ADX was meant to bury them alive, but instead it became something else. A place where rage, madness, and violence never die. Because in the end, the truth of ADX Florence is this. They may be locked away. They may never walk free again. But inside those cells, the most dangerous men in the world are not finished. They are rotting. They are waiting. And they will never stop reminding us. We don't rot alone.